Hi, this is John Hatton. I'm a software engineer with SL International. I've spent much of the last 16 years in Papua New Guinea, land of over 800 languages, and a place with a lot of language documentation work to be done. It's always been a great place for hardy foreign graduate students and other researchers. But Papua New Guinean university students and lecturers are rarely involved in this research. I'm thinking of folks like these, the language and literature students from the University of Goroka in Eastern Highlands Province. Most of these people would grow up in town speaking Tokpisin and English. Few would speak the language of their parents and their home areas. But they do appear to value their rich cultural and linguistic diversity, and they'd like to be involved in preserving it. University students like this are the elite, and they could make a major contribution to language documentation. Imagine one of these young men, for example, who would think, well, in spring break, I'm going to go home to my parents' home area, take some equipment with me, do some language documentation. Sounds great, but as we think about it, realize that today the technical bar is probably too high. He'd probably get frustrated and not be able to meet his goals. Well, why would I say that? Well, what are his goals? Let's say they are to create a well-annotated archive submission and create a subtitle video that he can give back to the community in the form of smartphones or DVDs, something like that. Well, these are the things that he would have to be trained to do. He'd have to keep track of metadata, various artifacts that come out of his recording equipment. He'd have to learn to find and handle files on his hard drive, to be able to rename them consistently, to be able to put them in a sensible structure. He'd have to learn to use several computer programs, many of which even I as a software engineer find to be scary. But he didn't grow up using computers. He may almost never use a computer, in fact. So the technical bar for him is really quite high. Well, other people get it done, don't they? Yeah. Foreign PhD students can cobble together any mix they need to get the job done, a mix of training and tools and help when they get stuck. But many others need a different solution. For those folks, we built SayMore, which is open source software for Windows from SL International. How does SayMore work? Well, let's start by quickly looking at the end product. Here we have 3 complete sessions along with 2 speakers and information on those speakers. In this canoe session, we have all the files related to the session, including the original recording in QuickTime format, along with metadata about it, such as its technical properties and who did the recording. We also have a version in the more standard MP4 format and an extracted WAV file. We have an Elan formatted XML file of time-aligned transcription and translation. And we have this 5-channel WAV with the original recording, plus 1 channel of careful speech and another of oral translation.
Gamay niwen in alngubin ina abal alngubon, and our language is Papuan. In mutu ara abalan, because we live on the inland of the island.
And on YouTube, we have the video with captions in both the vernacular and in English. So how did we get there? Well, let's back up and see how we did all this using SayMore. We start by telling SayMore to create a new session based on a recording that already resides on a camera or an audio recorder. SayMore creates a session folder for it on our hard disk, copies the file over there, and sets everything up. Now I'm going to change the ID, and as I do, Notice that the files in the session are automatically renamed to match the new ID. Next, we'll enter a title. And identify the people that were involved. Set the genre. Now SayMore has a couple of nice ways of helping us tag where we're at with each session. For now, we're just going to mark this session as in progress. And then notice down here that SayMore looks at our file names and it doesn't think we have an informed consent for someone associated with this session. Let's check on that. Sure enough, James Schema have this little icon warning us that we're missing an informed consent for him. Well, we actually have that file, so we just drag it in here. That copies it to the right folder. But it still doesn't know that this is informed consent. You can see we still have that warning. Well, it's because the name doesn't tell SayMore that it's informed consent, so we're going to rename it. And now we get credit for having that for James. And back in our session, we have credit for having informed consent for everybody that was part of this session. Okay, now this session has a move file, which is QuickTime, but I'd like to have a more standard MP4 file for archiving. So I can do that right in SayMore. Right, now I'm ready to start transcribing. At this point, SayMore needs an audio file to do transcription, which we don't have yet, so it offers to create one for us. So it creates the wave, and now we're ready to do annotating. SayMore works by having you first break up the audio into segments and then later going in and transcribing them. That makes it really easy. We have lots of ways to do that, as you can see here. For now, we're going to just use the auto segmenter to automatically break it up for us so that we get these two columns and rows where each row is a segment. When the cursor is in a cell in this grid, we hear the audio for that cell over and over while we transcribe it. I'm terrible at transcription, so it does help me a bit to slow it down. I'm going to use the mouse throughout this demo so you can see the cursor moving, but actually this is optimized to be used with just easy keyboard commands for moving between cells, starting and stopping the audio, and so forth. Okay, you get the idea. Transcription can be a lot easier than a tool that you might be familiar with. Now, in the middle of a project, it's easy to lose the big picture. So SayMore has this progress tab, which gives us statistics on things like how much we've collected, how complete our annotations are, what our genre coverage is like. Okay, that's enough to give us some context in which to talk about the aims of the SayMore project. SayMore aims, first of all, to help you stay organized. It manages your file names and the organization of all your files. And because everything is organized, it can know helpful things, like it can know when you're missing informed consent, and it can warn you about that. SayMore aims to make you more productive by making transcription almost a pleasure. We hear regularly from people not even doing language documentation who have just found SayMore and are using it because of its easy transcription. Now, on video, while there is some work to be done, SayMore is already quite helpful in terms of conversion and handling. When training time is limited, it's really helpful if the software itself knows the steps to doing a complete job. SayMore's integrated metadata forms, archiving, and charting all help the new researcher know, what do I do now? Next, SayMore aims to bring basic oral language documentation, or BOLD, into the mainstream. If you haven't heard of BOLD, this is where we get speakers to do a transcription and a translation in the oral audio realm, not having to bother with typing. This allows the community to play a larger role in the work and allows us to get material preserved in a lot less time. Let me show you how we do this in bold. First, we're going to do the careful speech. And as before, we start with this annotation tab. And this time we're going to tell it we're just going to use careful speech tool in order to identify the timeline segments. So the game we play is that you listen to the source in this top row, and then you re-speak it carefully in the bottom row.
Non zingin gima.
And you go back up for another chunk.
Non gimala mutukon orin siasi.
Now, if you let go of the button too late, it's easy to reposition the boundary. SayMore automatically plays back the last bit for you. Then we re-speak that.
Non gimale mutukon aurin siasi.
So while I'm using the mouse here for the demo so you can see, this actually works quite well using just the space bar, which is all you really have to train somebody to do, is just to push the space bar down while they listen, and then press the space bar down again while they talk, and so forth. Next, in the bold process, we get someone who can translate into English, and we do something similar. We bring up the oral translation tool, which already has the segments from careful speech. And this time, do the same thing, except for we speak in English.
Gima. Non gimala mutukon orin siasi. I live on an island on Siasi, Umboy Island, Kimalamoro Province. Umboy Island in Morobe Province.
Now, based on that work, SayMore automatically generates this multi-track wave with the original and the oral annotations that we saw before. Now, the idea of bold is that at this point, we have a set of files that are ready to archive and share. At any point in the future, anyone could take this package and transcribe that careful speech and oral translation. And if they did it in SayMore, it's particularly easy to do this. Let me show you. Now, because we previously recorded careful speech, SayMore automatically selects that as the audio to play back when we're in a cell. And that makes transcription easier.
Gima. Non zingin gima. Non zingin gima. Non zingin.
All right, I'm still terrible at phonetic transcription, but it's a lot easier using the careful speech.
Non gimalep mutukon aurin.
And of course, if we put the cursor in the free translation cell, then we hear that English.
I live on an island on Siasi. I live on an island.
Now, SayMore aims to fill a niche in the language documentation software ecosystem, somewhere below Elan. The point is to complement rather than to compete with existing tools. For example, we saw there that you didn't have to go and set up any tiers in order to do the normal transcription and free translation that every project has. So what if you want a few more tiers to do some more detailed analysis? Well, you can't do that in SayMore. It's not that powerful. But at that point, you double-click on the Elan XML file that is already in there in SayMore. It opens in Elan, and then you can go forward and do your more complex analysis. Now you notice that there's still a big gap here in the lower left-hand corner. That's because none of these tools are appropriate for your typical low-tech language community village use. Those people too have a lot to contribute, but we need a different approach for them. Fortunately, Stephen Bird and Florian Hanke have been working on the smartphone approach to gathering up recordings right in the village with this really simple user interface. And now we can start to dream of seeing collaborative teams that gather in the village, process in the local university, and share quality material with international linguists and archives. And that brings us to SayMore's final aim, to play nicely with others. First way it does that is it uses the Elan XML for time-aligned data rather than having its own format. It provides a number of export options. And the last way that SayMore plays nicely is when it's connected to an archive intake system. At this point, the system we've connected to is SIL's own archive, but the idea would be the same for any of them. SayMore gathers up all the files of the session, as well as any of the people associated with the session, and builds a package. It then launches the archive intake program, which in this demo is SIL's RAMP program. Now notice here in RAMP that SayMore has pre-filled in what it knows. Things like the title and what kinds of files are in the package. But there are other questions that SayMore doesn't know the answers to, so the user has to answer those. It goes through this form answering the questions that SayMore didn't know until finally it comes to a button at the end that lets him upload to the archive. Now, there's still some things we need to do with SayMore. It doesn't do two important things with video, and that is that trimming that you have to do at the beginning of most videos, at the beginning and the end. You can't currently do that inside SayMore. Also, we need a way to do subtitled videos and push those out to DVDs or to smartphones without using YouTube. We'd like to have additional archive targets, so if you represent an archiving institution and would like to talk about how you could hook up to SayMore, please let us know. We'd like to have SayMore on other operating systems, of course. On a final note, if you'd like to collaborate in moving SayMore forward in some way, let me know. You can download SayMore now from saymore.palazzo.org.